Today, we're going to be talking in particular about Russia and Russia's influence on elections around the world, and not just in our own countries, but other places too. Russia has various ways in which it tries to influence other countries, not least by invading them. But we're going to talk about issues that fall short of that, and there've been some developments this week that I think Emily is going to kick us off with.
That's right. And I think it's really thinking about it as influence in elections is almost too narrow. It's we really need to think about this as trying to influence geopolitics. So we can start with what Russia calls its own sphere of influence, its own neighborhood. There is, I should say, Georgia, where hundreds of I mean, thousands of people have been taking to the streets, not only in the capital of Tbilisi, but all over the country to protest the ruling Georgian Dream Party's announcement that it would be putting EU accession talks on the back burner until 2028. Um, it says that it favors, I'm reading this from Reuters, Georgian Dream says it favors a pragmatic policy with Russia, which backs two regions which split from Georgia after it left the Soviet Union. The party says it aims to safeguard peace amid the war in Ukraine, which has been shattered by Russian invading forces since early 2022. I think it's important to note that I think two things are important to note here. The first is that if you go to the country of Georgia, you will see more EU flags than anywhere in the world. Like probably, I mean, more than in Brussels, right? Like that's an exaggeration, but not really. Um, and it's not only about. It's not the Georgians are like, oh, I can't wait to get like the Aki, like I can't wait to get my accession plan. It's that the EU and joining the EU represents not doing things Russian style, right? Represents not being in a corrupt oligarchy where people, as they are being now, are. This is also per the Reuters report. We'll put it in the show notes, where people are not arrested and mysteriously beaten during protests. We should say one other thing, which is that the Georgian Dream Party is led by this guy called Bidzina Ivanishvili, who a little over a decade ago was briefly the prime minister, and he is now sort of the power behind the party throne. Um, he famously lives in this glass house in the hills of Tbilisi, and when he first sort of came on the scene, there were TV reporters who were like, okay guys, let's think, are there any non-villains who live in dramatic glass houses on the hills? But he made his fortune in Russia in the 1990s, and sort of is thought to have a penchant for doing things Russian style. So this isn't, I don't know that we can say, oh, this is the direct hand of Russia, but you can look and say, well, actually, back in 2014, the reason that the reason that the then president of Ukraine had to flee the country is because he reneged on a deal to, or sort of reneged on an EU association agreement under pressure from Russia. So this whole, I think, especially in the US, we often focus on NATO in this area, but the idea of whether countries neighboring Russia can or cannot join the EU is it is in some ways a more sensitive issue because it's about how these countries are going to do business, which way Central Eastern European man and woman. So that's Georgia. Then we have Romania, where this is a wild story. So Romania um, has annulled the first round of its presidential election. And what happened here is that a far-right independent candidate by the name of Georgescu, per the BBC, came out of almost nowhere to lead the first round a couple weeks ago, amid allegations of Russian interference. And basically, so obviously this candidate has said this was a coup. There are people who were saying, how could you do this? There was all this support on TikTok and especially among the diaspora. And basically what authorities pointed to is that TikTok accounts allegedly or reportedly per Romanian intelligence created by a foreign state back in 2016 were activated last month to back Georgescu. So all of a sudden, all of these social media accounts are lit up, right, and in support of this one guy. And we can talk more about is that actually disqualifying, right? This was a big conversation back in 2016 when we had our presidential elections because it was both proven that yes, Russia did, and actually This happens like not infrequently. This happened in European elections back in June.
There was a conversation about it in relation to Brexit as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's not infrequent that Russia will like make social media accounts and post as a genuine and have people post as genuine Romanians or Britons or I don't know, Slovaks or Americans. Whether that rises to a level of we need to annul our presidential election is, I think, probably up for debate. And then I think I would just briefly say before I end my monologue here, um, this isn't only in, we can zoom out and it's not only in Russia's backyard that we're seeing this, right? Like Bashar al Assad just fled to Moscow or fled to Russia um, because Syrian rebels were finally, after, gosh, over a decade now, right? After brutal repression of a crackdown, a brutal repression of attempted uprising, were able to take Damascus. Assad fled. The reason, or one of the reasons that he was able to stay in power so long in the first place, if you go back a decade, if you think to, you know, 10, 12 years ago, is because of Russia and because of the protection that Russia afforded to Syria, including like really heinous crimes against the Syrian people. And it's sort of darkly funny that now, all these years later, Russia basically said, "We're not at the emotional capacity to help you right now, Assad." In no small part because they have their own war in Ukraine going on. But it sort of goes to show the impact that Russia's, playing a big role in a region, or on the other hand, stepping back from a region can have. I'll just say one last thing, which is that I thought it was a funny post that basically said Russia's going to hate the multipolar world, right? Because which the reason it's funny to me is that if you've heard anything that any Russian official has said for the last, I don't know, 20 years, right? It's been that we don't have a unipolar world. Like, it can't just be the US. We need to have, like, Russia also matters. We are also a superpower. We also need to be involved in the writing of the rules. That's only fair. Um, and actually, there's, and this is not the first, like, I once interviewed a woman who said, yeah, but in order to make that your whole thing, you kind of need the Americans to have it together and to be at the table so that you can argue that you should be at the table yelling at them. And when that falls into disarray, which we are, maybe seeing right now, what have you got? So I think I think today we're going to talk not only about Russia's attempts to influence geopolitics and influence different parts of the world, but what happens when the dog catches the car, right? Like what when you get what you want and you are one of these big players in our multipolar world, what now?